Just wanted to do a little brief tutorial on tail shapes and why we have different tail shapes and theoretically what they do and how they came about. So anyways, start out with, say, a hot dog board, on average around 14 inches a foot up. Old school fish, you know, those boards are 15, 16 inches and a minimum of, say, 10 inches from corner to corner. So here's a big old wide square tail. And what people did, Steve List, the Mirandans, people that made early swallowtails, did is basically take a round pin template like that and invert it to create a fishtail. So you have the area under your feet, your template's got a straighter line, you basically still have a lot of rail, a lot of drive out of the turn. You've got hold, you've reduced all this, you've taken out all that area, volume. You got a tail that bites and a tail that pivots. I always try and put it in perspective that the more angular the tail, or the more angular and the greater the break, that's how the board's going to turn. Stepping down a really wide tail, most of us are used to a super common tail that's been around for a long time. Squash tail. It's an old bump squash I used to do for Matt Archibald, 1983, a while ago. So you can see what happens. The difference is you get more break in the curve here, in the outline curve. It steps down the tail width. Squash tail. A lot of variations on squash tail. You can have a narrower square tail. The harder the corners, the more angular the tail, the more abrupt it releases, the sharper, to a certain extent, the turns are. Of course, a lot of it has to do with how much curve there is in the hip, break in the bottom rocker, fin relationships, but generally speaking, hard square tail, you know, has a longer rail, the sharper turns, the smoother the curve. When you start getting into round pins, the more continuity you're going to have going from rail to rail. Round pin, or round tail. So we're taking more area out, putting more curve back up in here, and the board's going to have a much more fluid feel to it. You're going to feel a definite link when you're switching from one rail to the other. It's going to be a much more continuous, fluid feel. Round tails, elliptical tails, thumb tails, those are all, I mean, they've been around for a long time. A lot of the boards I made for Aki in the early to mid 80s were what I would call an elliptical tail. Some people call them thumb tails because they look like a thumb. But the basic notion is you have a lot of curve, but you still maintain some area in the last few inches of the board behind the fin, so the tail doesn't sit too deep in the water. Start getting into boards for more powerful waves, longer, narrower boards. The curves are more drawn. Once again, the templates themselves haven't changed a tremendous amount. This round tail is one I use for Jamie O'Brien and a lot of other people. This is a 25-year-old round pin template, and you can see that the segments of the curves are pretty close. different tails. Bat tail. A lot of talk about bat tail. Same thing. Bat tail is basically taking a squash tail. You have a squash tail here. What you do is you invert that last bit of curve there. So you take out a little bit of area, you create more of a corner, a little bit more bite. Bat tails are pretty popular with quads. There was a similar tail. I mean, bat tails have been around for a long time. This is a bat tail of sorts that I did for West Lane, 1981. Early 3-fin. The wing is used to step down the area, so you don't have a lot of excessive curve through the fin area, so you still have a release point and a little less area here. That's a 30-year-old bat tail. And this is a little more modern version, a little more areas taken out. But also worked with Will Jobson in the early 90s making twinsers. And what Will would do is use something like this bat tail, and he would have, on the bottom, he'd have a little slot concave that fit out through the corner. And so on those 4-fin boards, not like a quad, but like a twin fin with little canards in front of it, the tail had a little bit more grip to it and bite. So there's a lot you can do with creating corners, taking out area, you know, so you have a tail that maintains width under your back foot, but you can take the area. The notion is that you take the area out behind your back foot, and it all just depends on the feel you're after. Putting it simply, round tail, round turn, square tail, square turn. The wings, they're used to step down the area. So you could have a board that's very, very wide, say 15 plus inches, and you can see that it steps down and takes out a lot of the area without having all the curve here. The swallowtails you can combine with a series of wings to coincide with fins, or deep channels. This 6DC, 6 deep channel, double wing swallow from the early 80s, and the wings, the brakes coincided with the channels, so everything kind of released, fed and released in harmony, in theory. You know, and this double wing swallow, double wing squash did a lot of them, even back in single fin days. Terry Fitzgerald, Dick Brewer, Reno Abalera, just to name a few, were early proponents of wings in the early 70s. And they've lasted the test of time. It's a great way to have width coming into the last foot or so of the board, and then stepping it down. So single wings, double wings, even the Piranha, the triple wing. Triple wing's been around for a while. We goofed around with them a little bit in the early 70s. There's pictures of guys like Michael Peterson with 3, 4, 5 sets of wings, but they create a lot of fulcrums in the rail, so as you move your foot around. They create a lot of fulcrums in the rail, and you know, the thought is to have them coincide with fin placement. So as you move your foot forward and back on the rail, you've got real distinct turning points that you can sort of pop your turns off of. And we've even worked with what I call high wings. This is a 98 Hipster, and it's got the wing up quite a ways at about 19 inches. It's sort of a mini Sting. So there's a lot of different ways to do the swallowtail with wings. Once again, it all depends on the feel you're after, but generally speaking, the wider the tail is, the more inclined I am to use multiple sets of wings to step down the width, so that you don't have this huge transition from corner to corner. It has its place. Some people like the feel, but I usually like to step the width down, depending on how wide it is up here, down to about 6, maximum 7 inches for a small wave board, so the board still has continuity and transition through turns. We do the same thing with round pins. You can put a series of there's a lot of lines here, but you can use a series of wings to step down width from it doesn't always have to be a swallowtail. I do a lot of single and double wing round pins. In the past, I've even done boards of squash tails that are single and double wings. But usually with squash tails, we like, the whole point of the squash tail is to maintain a lot of width in the back of the board, but the smoother the turn, the more rounded you make a corner, and the less area you have, and the less abrupt the transition. I'm repeating myself a little bit here, so you're going to have to edit out some of it. This is you can see like the difference between a red line here. It's the template on top, something like I might do for Josh Kerr. This would be the stringer. And then for a GTR, it's really just got a little bit more width in the last 10 inches of the board. A little wider pod on the tail, a little more support, a little more lift, area, volume, and designed usually for smaller, weaker surf.